Welcome to the Darnell and Cody show. Today we're going to talk about our presidential pick for 2020. Our current pick is Andrew Yang. He's running as a Democrat, and while he's more of an obscure candidate, I like that he doesn't pander to people's sentiments and more so focuses on facts and statistics to address real concerns people have, not concerns of corporate interests, but concerns of human beings as human beings. His motto is humanity first, and he represents that in his policies. At the helm of his policies is UBI, or Universal Basic Income. And to sum up what UBI would entail, basically every U.S. citizen above the age of 18 will get what Yang calls a freedom dividend, $1,000 a month with no strings attached. Now, this isn't a new idea, and Thomas Paine actually spoke of UBI in a positive light, along with other notable figures like Martin Luther King and to some extent Milton Friedman, who championed the idea of a negative income tax, which is slightly different from UBI. The reason why this dividend is so important in this age is because the most common jobs in the nation are currently being automated. Most common jobs in this nation being retail, transportation, and customer service. Soon AI will be taking over these jobs, leaving millions of Americans jobless while providing billions in profit to tech companies that automate their jobs away. Now, this is just a part of capitalism. Without this process of advancement, we wouldn't have all the new cool things we enjoy, be it something recreational like the iPhone or something more practical like new medicines. All of these new things are driven by capital interests, though we also like to imagine that our engineers, scientists, and doctors are in it to help humanity. Soon, AI will take over jobs that require university degrees and extensive training even, like radiology, which further highlights the point that we need a sort of safety net for citizens. Now, $1,000 a month or $12K a year isn't going to be enough to retire on or make people not want to work. What it does is going to supplement what people need or want, be it paying bills or getting a health checkup, getting childcare, pursuing a higher education, or even just putting food on the table. It allows citizens a bit of relief and security against losing their jobs, which is inevitable given the current technological climate. And this is essentially why UBI is so important at the crux and is at the crux of Yang's platform. He makes the interesting case that the dichotomy between capitalism and socialism is no longer true. Technology has changed the game. Capitalism only works if there are enough jobs for people to find jobs. People without jobs have no money. People without money can't buy things. People not buying things collapses the economy. So while technology and technological advancement and the continuation of capitalism is important, we need to temper that with social policies that make sure people can pursue capital and find meaningful work without fear of losing their homes and starving. We need a system of capitalism that works for people, not people that slave away for the ideologies of capitalism, despite suffering and misery. And this is one of the key reasons why I support Andrew Yang, as I think other candidates aren't addressing this issue like he is. But what are your thoughts on this, Cody?
Well, I think Andrew hits the nail on the head with a lot of these concerns he has. Automation has already taken over 5 million jobs in America, and specifically in certain areas of America, such as the automobile manufacturing jobs, specifically in Ohio and Pennsylvania, certainly other areas as well. And these were the major swing states that ended up aiding Trump in his election, which is a little bit interesting to note. And Andrew sees this as just the start of the trend that is almost certainly going to happen with or without our system adjusting to it. So you're going to have, as you said, driving jobs, manufacturing jobs, even retail jobs, customer service, hospitality-esque jobs at hotels and other service desk type situations. Is just going to be kiosks or AI robots that are sufficient enough to respond to human questions on demand, which is coming out within the next few years, if not, it's probably already really being worked on by Google to a near perfection already. I know they have call robots that can answer people's questions adequately. Now we have Siri and all these other things that are good examples of how they can pick up on any human voice. So this is just a growing concern, and it should be a concern for every American, really. And we need to figure out how we're going to benefit from this when you have massive billion-dollar companies, hundreds of billions of dollars potentially, once they get this going and they don't need to pay people anymore. We need to benefit from that, and we're a part of the system that is a great system. And Andrew Yang has a way for it to work for us, and that's the beauty of his platform. So I think that every American should be keeping their eye on automation and specifically AI development. And it's going to come sooner than later, unfortunately, which a lot of people aren't aware of. And Andrew Yang is kind of bringing a lot of light to, which is incredibly important. And as for the basic income aspect of just aiding people, it also gives people a safety net. If they lose their job for whatever reason, you get laid off, at least you're going to be able to pay rent for the next foreseeable future. You can even switch living stances if you need to, but you're still going to be able to pay rent for an apartment or what have you with that $1,000. It also allows people to take risks with trying to start new businesses, which is one of the best ways to become a profitable individual now. If you start your own company or aid someone in starting their own company, there's a very, very lucrative opportunities for you in those situations. And a lot of people right now aren't able to take those risks because they don't have that safety net. They're not willing to quit their job and go without a paycheck for a year or two to start a company potentially. And this will provide people that opportunity. And another thing it does is it provides people with a way to, provide for themselves when they're in college, or they're also suffering from medical expenses, just anything down the line. And as you said earlier, the statistic actually is about 9 in 10 Americans. It's sometimes judged at 8 out of 10, but most of the studies say 9 out of 10 Americans can't afford $1,000 if they had to pay it on the next month. People are living paycheck to paycheck in America at a greater rate than they ever have. It's partly due to stagnant wages, but it's also just partly due to tough living in America. Housing and everything else is just so expensive right now. So if you get $1,000 every month, that money is going to go directly back into the economy for the most part of every American. They're going to get car repairs, and they're going to finally pay off some bills that they haven't been paying off, etc. So that money is going to just go back into the cycle, which is how he plans on paying for a good portion of this, which is a great idea. So I think that it makes sense. So the next thing I really like about Andrew Yang is he's talking about decriminalizing opioids, which is, to me, a very big issue. I've had some addiction in my own family and from friends of mine, and the opioid crisis is killing 8 Americans every hour, and it's only increasing over the past several years with all kinds of pharmaceutical drugs that are not really well researched and etc. We'll get into that a little bit more because Andrew has a stance on that as well. But these drugs are very addictive, and people are starting to abuse heroin and fentanyl and other things at a higher rate as well. So Andrew believes we should just go ahead and decriminalize all these things. And it's not because it's too expensive or it's just because so many people are using these drugs. It's because this is a public health crisis, and his priority is to make Americans healthy. And the way to do that is not to criminalize an addiction or a disease. Alcoholism is described in America as a disease. And that is exactly what these other things are. drug addiction is a disease, just as alcohol addiction is also a disease. And these people need psychiatric help and medical aid. A lot of these people actually, specifically heroin addicts, can't stop taking heroin once they are heavily reliant on the drug without dying. You need to have special medical care in order to break your heroin addiction. And this is incredibly dangerous for people that aren't aware of this when they try and come down or even break their addiction. So if you treat people as not a criminal, but as a victim of a disease or as a patient of an illness, it is more humane, and it will get down to the root of the problem and not just perpetuate a system as we've had for over 60 years now.
Right, and that's really a bipartisan issue. So you have people like Ron Paul was championing this idea, and he got laughed at. And he's a doctor, so he's come from a standpoint where we don't treat, like you said, alcoholism the same way. And he was asking the audience, if we legalize heroin today, who here is going to go start doing heroin? So it goes back to also asking ourselves if we need the government telling us what we should or shouldn't be doing. And there's a certain amount of intellectual integrity and intellectual respect towards the citizens and saying, look, these drugs and harmful things exist. It's your right to partake in them if you so choose. And this, you can say the same thing with alcohol and cigarettes, for example. We know they're bad for us, but we still have the freedom and right to do them and partake in them as adults and as people with free will. But there are cases where it spirals kind of out of control and you lose control of your addiction. And when that happens, we don't treat these people as criminals. It's important that we treat them as patients and people that need help. It's an illness. And this really is a bipartisan issue. I feel like it should be, and not just something that's left or right. The next thing I want to talk about was gun safety. How about having cameras on policemen? This is also something that's should be bipartisan, in my opinion. So I know the right wants very lenient gun laws, but I think it's time that we can have the Second Amendment, but have it in a regulated or responsible manner. So what Andrew Yang is suggesting is that, like, getting cars or learning or getting the right to drive, going fishing, going hunting, you all need a license for these. So it's pretty crazy to think about it. You need a license to hunt and go fishing, but you don't need a license to own a gun. And this is something that has to change. So people should, all responsible gun owners will have no real problem with this. They'll go get educated on gun safety, gun education, and get a license just like anything else they need in life that's has a real repercussions in life if abused. And he's also been known to talk about things like recalling all guns so that those guns can be replaced with technologically enhanced guns that only work with the owner. So only the owner will be able to shoot the gun. And these guns will also have ID verification systems that will let you know that, okay, who shot it, when was it shot, and who was the bullet. The bullet can be traced back to the owner. And these things are just things that will help deter crime. And obviously, it's going to be a long process. You're never going to get really truly rid of the black market, but it's a step in the right direction. I feel like, especially given that a lot of these school killings and stuff like that were happening with stolen guns. They weren't guns that the people bought. They're just guns that people just took from their parents or uncle. And even the guns that they did buy, if you had a licensing system, maybe, or a gun education system, hopefully it would have deterred at least a small minority of them. And even that's a win. If it can deter even one school shooting, then it's a victory. And the next thing I want to talk about was the cop cam, which kind of relates to this, but it's a separate issue. He wants to get a police camera for all police officers on duty. And I think this is kind of a controversial issue, really. I don't feel like that cops should have a right to a privacy when they're on duty, unless they're on a bathroom break or something. Everything should be transparent. we shouldn't be in the dark about, how a cop approached a certain conflict and just take his word for it. Because I feel like, as much as I give most cops the benefit of the doubt, we have known there were situations where cops have covered up, negligence and abuse of their power. So I think this cop cam idea really will put cops at least on, remind them that they're being watched and that they can't just get away with a lot of these things that they're getting away with, as well as kind of put at ease these I guess movements like Black Lives Matter. They are afraid that black people are more likely to face police brutality, and now this cop cam can be a way for people to know, okay, was this cop really a racist, this psycho killer killing black people haphazardly, or was there a real conflict and the cop has a reasonable danger? And this is all gonna solve a lot of these controversies that we have and these conflicts that divide our society, whether unite them. And I think this cop cam could be a step in the right direction, even though it may be a bit costly to implement. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I absolutely agree with his position on the gun control specifically. I think that there's not really much to add there. It's common sense that if you're gonna arm someone or allow someone to buy a weapon that can kill a great deal of people within seconds, even a pistol that is semi-automatic that has 9 rounds in it can kill 9 people in about 9 seconds. So, just training people how to use them, what's safe to do, what's not safe to do. Get a license to own a gun. That makes sense. If you drive a car, like you said, you need to have a license. So it's just common sense right there. As for the cop cam, it is a controversial issue with this specifically as well. But I'm strongly for it. And I think I'm basically strongly for it for the same reasons you are. It's going to remove doubt from circumstances where there is a lot of doubt right now. In our society, we have a lot of incidences where it's kind of a he said, she said, or he said and he said, or she said and she said situation. And it's just one word of a person versus another person's word. And you can't really do anything with that. You can't make heads or tails of it realistically or fact-based. And with these cameras, you're going to be able to see relatively what happened. I mean, things might be out of camera frame, etc. Hopefully, most of it will be captured. But the main thing is you're also going to hear what's going on. So it's just going to eliminate issues that we have, as you said. We have a lot of these issues right now. And it's just another common sense thing. And like you said, it's going to be a little bit expensive. But we should be willing to pay for our citizens to be safe by the people who are supposed to protect them. These people need to be answerable to someone besides themselves, which is unfortunately not really worked. I mean, cops kind of cover for each other. They're all colleagues. They work with each other, etc. So we just need a non-biased way to be able to decide what's actually happening. And the cams are just a great solution to that. So totally for it. And another thing that Andrew Yang constantly is talking about is reducing the higher education costs. Right now, in our country, tuition has increased by over 400% in just 25 years in many situations. And students are getting saddled by over $100,000 student loan debts before they even start their work careers. And people are paying debt off for their entire lives for their college loans at this point. It's no longer a system that's working for the student. It's a system that's working for the colleges, and they have no real accountability They just kind of charge what they charge, and people are expected to pay what they pay and get the degree because that's what they need to get the job that they want. But the education isn't getting any better. It's actually getting worse, and the costs are booming at a astronomical rate. So it doesn't make any sense. Things aren't adding up. If the colleges were performing exceptionally, then yeah, they could start charging more for going to that specific college. But we're not seeing that math add up. We're seeing subpar education with rapid growth in cost. And Andrew Yang wants to get this under control. So what are your thoughts on this, Darnell?
I agree. We have this system where we allow universities to operate like corporations, focused on profit rather than really focusing on students and their education. And for example, you have these CEOs, not CEOs, chairmen, directors, administrators of these universities making 6-figure, 7-figure salaries, and you wonder what's the students really getting out of this? And when they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the new football stadium or something of that nature, you wonder what benefit am I getting as a student? My tuition is going towards building this new football stadium that I really don't care about as a student. I might be more focused on getting my degree, and it's troubling. It irks me that the university is more focused on perhaps increasing their public outlook and prestige than the education and their students.
Right, exactly that. And you mentioned the football stadiums, which actually brings me to another point that Andrew Yang has taken a stance on, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And he says that the NCAA should pay its athletes, which at the moment it provides only for free education. Basically, these star-studded athletes perform near professional or semi-professional sports for the college's behalf, sometimes making hundreds of millions of dollars for the school. And none of the athletes are able to profit from their own sweat and blood and hard work that they put in doing their job. Essentially, it is a job, and professionals do get paid for it. But for some reason, our college athletes specifically aren't even allowed to make money from their own name being put in a video game, for instance. And this is very troubling. It's near modern slavery-esque living conditions in a way, because these are very high-performing athletes that have to, train every day. They have to go to practice all the time. Their lives revolve around performing in these sports. And at the end of the day, the colleges profit greatly from them, and they're not allowed to see any of that profit, despite the fact that sometimes their coaches themselves are getting paid multiple millions of dollars. Sometimes the highest paid coach, I believe, in college football is getting $7.9 million. So that's just a ridiculous salary if the players are receiving $0. And another problem with this is that these players are actually paying for other sports, such as rowing and tennis. All these other sports aren't bringing in revenue the way that college basketball and college football does. And so these students are, quite frankly, paying for other students to be able to play their sport. And again, they're not seeing any money or profit for themselves, even though they're actually paying for the benefit of other students at their own university. It's a very troubling situation.
Right, and I agree. It seems kind of unfair, and a lot of these athletes, the futures are on the line. At least those that want to play professionally. And if they get injured, for example, and they miss out on an opportunity to play for the NFL or the NBA, the colleges aren't compensating them for those injuries, right? So they're missing out on a lifetime outlook. So it seems kind of unbalanced the way NCAA organizations handle their student athletes. Which kind of leads me to my next point, which isn't exactly related, but on the topic of education, Andrew Yang also talks about promoting vocational education in high school. It's a key point that we've talked about before in our education podcast, but I haven't yet seen a presidential candidate really talk about this in depth. And it's really important for students to have more options and kind of get another perspective that you don't need to always go to a college to get a degree and to get a good job or a decent paying job. You can have a respectable job going to vocational school or learning a trade. And for a lot of these students that have more or less useless degrees and can't find jobs right now, maybe this would have been a better option for them. And we really need to kind of integrate these kind of vocational programs into our education system rather than only emphasizing higher education. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, exactly. I think that we kind of covered this in our podcast earlier on public education, as you said, but going to college isn't going to work for everybody. And what's interesting is Andrew Yang is one of the first candidates that is really in the spotlight, at least, is bringing this to light and making it part of his platform. It's been a real big problem where you have basically students being told their only chance of success is paying for these overpriced schools, as we just stated earlier. And that's not true. They can get trained to become a car mechanic or an electrician or an elevator repairsman, locksmith. There's 100 options. There's more than 100 options. So Andrew is addressing this, and quite frankly, he's going to help America out greatly if this receives mainstream publicity, I guess, for lack of a better word. Other candidates need to pick this up because he's addressing a major concern that is at the root of American economy. We're going to need people that aren't just going to be biologists and computer experts and financial experts and bankers and what have you with these college educations. We're going to need people that can do the hard work, fix the robots with their own hands if they need to, because that's what's coming. But someone's going to have to be able to fix the robots before they can fix themselves. And we need people to be able to repair damages to property. We need to have infrastructure workers and all these other things that are still going to be heavily relied upon. And people aren't getting the message right now when they're in high school that these jobs are available. And it's very much an issue.
Right. And the last thing I wanted to mention was his program for Medicare for All. And I've always been a bit skeptical on universal health care, but I have to say Andrew Yang's plan has been the most comprehensive that I've seen from either platform or either party. So what he wants to do is give a flat salary to doctors instead of doctors having a price for service, right? Where doctors get more if they see more patients, or doctors get more based on what drugs they prescribe to patients. And this kind of incentivizes doctors to maybe give a drug that a patient doesn't need. Maybe he wants to just rush through a patient so he can get to the next patient because that's how he makes more money, right? And it kind of de-incentivizes all this and just says, look, you get a single flat salary, a good salary, mind you, but you're not going to have any other incentive now. You're just going to look at the patient before you and build a more better patient-doctor relationship and a real human relationship, not just the you're my paycheck relationship where, okay, let me get through you real quick so I can get to the next patient that's going to pay me. And I think this has been, according to him, it's been highlighted by the Cleveland Clinic, where doctors are under this program, and it's based on the statistics, they have been doing much better and having a much uh, affordable rate of care at a decent level of care. So there's no reason that the United States, being one of the wealthiest countries in the world, should should have its citizens struggle to get healthcare properly. And I think that's what he's trying to address. And I think it's a good idea overall. What are your thoughts on this, Cody?
Well, I agree. Myself, paying for healthcare in America right now, it's very overpriced, even for a young single adult. So I would highly support him going after basically a single buyer system or something of the like, because the system we have right now, it is just overpriced. It's overpriced in comparison to every other first world country that there is. And that is just very troubling, and it's just ridiculous for the American consumers to be having to shell out these amounts of dollars for all this crazy stuff, when everybody else around the world is paying less than we are. And we like to brag about how great our country is. America is a great country, but we're not great in everything, and we could be better in a lot of things, and that's what's going to make us great, is if we get better. And that's what Andrew Yang is talking about on all these things. And with the healthcare, it's another thing where he's trying to get to bottom of the American health. He wants to take care of us. He wants us to be a healthy population. And that brings me into another thing, that he is trying to hold the pharmaceutical companies accountable, because they're making billions of dollars in profit since OxyContin has been released in 1995, for example. It's $35 billion that Purdue Pharma has made. And then they got farmed with just over $500,000, or $500 million for false advertisements on a non-addictive and temper-proofing. So basically, these companies are able to lie. These pharmaceutical companies, they lie about how safe a drug is. Then they get caught with their lie after years of research, and hundreds of thousands of people being affected, or millions of people being affected by their drug. And then they get fined a minuscule amount of dollars in comparison to the amount of money that they actually made with the drug. They're not learning their lesson. They just see that this is an opportunity for them to keep on damaging the American public at the cost of profit. Basically, they're making priority and profit over safety. And this is a problem that Andrew Yang sees as a number one concern for the American public health. And he plans on addressing this. And it also brings me into my last point I have, which I really love about Andrew Yang's platform. And he wants to get rid of the whole GDP way of thinking about our economy, because it's not an accurate way of scaling how well our population is doing in comparison to the stock market or the rich people. GDP is growing right now, but our suicide rates are also growing. Our drug addiction is also growing. We have many problems in America that aren't being addressed, and people see the GDP number increasing, and they think that we're doing well as a country, and it's not accurate. If you have people committing suicide at incredibly high rates, it's a crisis. If you have people that are addicted to drugs at a mass scale around the country, we aren't doing fantastic, quite frankly. And Andrew Yang acknowledges this, and he wants to come up with a better way to measure how our public is doing. I think it's a fantastic way to do it, because right now we're not getting an accurate picture of how well our country is doing. Really, we're kind of unsure. People are convinced that because the GDP is growing, it's doing well, and it's not true. So what are your thoughts on this, Darnell?
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. People like to always mention statistics as a way of proving a point. And I mentioned this before in our education podcast. The statistics only show a small portion of a circumstance. If you look at the larger picture, right, talk about quality of life statistics. Are people really happy? Are people living meaningful lives? Are people being valued? And you see that these are probably in all-time lows, which is why there are people committing suicide, because they feel like they're not valuable, their life is not worth living. And it's something that should be addressed not just from a macro scale, but from an interpersonal scale as well. I think we really have to go look at how our society is functioning and what direction we want our society to go in the future. And it can be this bleak future where everything's measured in capital, right? You have more money, therefore you're happy, therefore you're worth more. Or we can go towards a society where we say money isn't the end game. Money is just merely the means to which we can attain a meaningful relationship with other people. And this is where the freedom dividend and universal basic income just kind of helps that, lifts that way of life. You don't need $10,000 a month to be happy. Even $1,000 a month, if you can spend it with the people you love and care about, and you don't have to worry about where you're going to sleep at night and what you're going to eat, that can drastically change the quality of life of a human being. And I feel like this is really something that's needed for American people. And before we finish off, the reason why I support this candidate is because I feel like he's not an establishment figure. He's not just some corporate shill or career politician. He's someone that really didn't have to do any of this. He came because he wanted to build a world where his children will be happy to live in. He wanted to help people. And his company that he started called Venture for America, I believe, was a nonprofit, and he was going around the country making jobs for Americans because he cares. And I think that's what's really should be the focus of his candidacy. And I really hope it doesn't get into identity politics or anything of that sort, because this is it's time to be nonpartisan about this. It's time to look at it, not left, not right, forward, as he says. And that's why I've really given up on trying to pursue ideology over people. I look at this candidate and I say, well, I tend to espouse more libertarian values, but I look at this candidate and say he has his heart in the right place and he has policies that he can put forth that will really help people. Then that's the way to go. It's time to kind of let go of our biases and our personal ideologies that kind of been really attaining nothing but divisiveness and arguing. And there's, as the famous saying goes, the cliche goes, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? There's capitalism and socialism can both work. I wouldn't even call them a socialism, but there's more than one way to help a nation run better and efficiently. And it's time that we all kind of move forward in that direction rather than just start arguing about silly things like race and things that really have nothing to do with living a productive life and meaningful life. What are your thoughts on this, Cody, before we wrap it up?
Well, I agree. I support him specifically because he's not a part of the established left or right. He's coming directly from the center, and my standpoint in the center here is common sense. He's addressing the things that are a problem. He's talking about them in open light. He's saying that they are things that need to be fixed, and he has solutions to fix them. And he doesn't care about the politics on the left or the right. He doesn't want to appeal to certain kinds of people specifically just because they are on his side of the lobby, so to speak. He is running as a Democrat, but he's explained, and I think that most people can kind of figure out that that's the best way to become the United States president is if you go through the Democratic or Republican parties. You get elected much easier than running independent. But I feel he is basically the independent, moderate choice because he's coming from such a common sense standpoint. And he has all the facts and data to support his stance, which a lot of politicians, left or right, lack. They use talking points and not facts. Andrew Yang has the facts, and that's why I support Andrew Yang.
Right, and I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thanks very much.